He ran against a woman in 16, and he beat a woman in 16. And Republicans, unlike our Democrat friends, do know the difference between men and women.
We had a 40-point lead. Now we're going to be talking about Trump insulting a woman.
I've met the man as well. I've talked to him. He was fantastic. He was sharp.
How sharp?
But that the badass that is Donald Trump is the reason that Donald Trump is here right now. And I agree with you. He will never lose that part of him, and he will certainly never cuddle a cat.
I know that you guys are doing the RNC's work for them. I know you're trying to help Trump, who's struggling right now.
Facts matter, you said.
He is not the border czar.
You're full of shit today.
Do you wish with hindsight you hadn't used that language?
I could have said much worse, Piers.
A month ago, Joe Biden walked stiffly and slowly onto the CNN stage in Atlanta for a debate he thought would save his presidency. Last night, with his closest family huddled behind the camera, he gave what would probably be his final Oval Office address.
I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people.
Well, the heart may have been there, but it wasn't a rousing or inspiring speech. Biden can't really do those anymore, and that's, of course, the big problem. The president visibly waned even during a modest 15-minute address to the American people. And the many people expecting answers on exactly why he quit the race or why he's fit to remain president for another 6 months were left with only more questions. There were a few trademark fluffs. There were 6 different references to democracy and why it's so important to save it. There was an almost laughably optimistic list of things he expects to accomplish in the remainder of his term, ranging from Supreme Court reform to curing cancer. And there was even time for a defensive roll call of apparent achievements, including this, frankly, whopper.
The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office.
Well, that's simply not true. It was simply not true that this president is the sharpest mind in D.C. with energy levels to put the rest of us to shame, as so many of his supporters continued to claim until it was obvious that he wasn't. This was a moment where the president could have gone out in a blaze of reflective glory on a 50-year career, which had many laudable moments. It was a moment in history. And despite his frailty and arguably his incompetence, I've always thought that Joe Biden is an industrious public servant and a thoroughly decent man who's been through, well, some unimaginable tragedy in his life. But this speech just left me feeling a little sad. The time for Biden to leave with honour passed a long time ago. And at the bitter end, only his wife and Harry Sisson, one of our guests today, were urging him to still cling on. And Joe Biden did not pass the torch, as he put it, to Kamala Harris. He was torched out of office by donors and grandees who decided he couldn't win. Everybody else knows that. Just an hour earlier, the man who knocked him to the canvas in that CNN debate was working crowds at another packed rally. The stark contrast was a reminder of why Joe Biden is no longer in the race.
You know, it could be caused when they call you a threat to democracy. You never know what causes it. I'm a threat to they're a threat to democracy. They're a threat to our country, period.
Well, during the president's address, Trump posted this photograph of himself looming next to a screen on his plane, like a hunter with a trophy kill. But how he must wish that Biden was still his opponent. Many people speculated that Trump was a changed man after surviving an assassination attempt. Humbled, emotional, even unifying. Nice, even. There's nothing like fresh meat to reawaken the old Trump senses. In a 60-minute diatribe, he said that Kamala Harris would be the worst lunatic ever in the White House, with policies that make Bernie Sanders look moderate. And in what became a day of 3 consequential speeches, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was given a hero's welcome for his appearance in Congress.
May God bless Israel, may God bless America, and may God bless the great alliance between Israel and America forever.
Netanyahu may be wildly unpopular back in Israel, but US lawmakers welcomed him like Churchill. And even as he spoke, protesters outside burned the US flag, hoisted the Palestinian colours above Union Station and scrawled "Hamas is coming" on a monument. It wasn't a great advertisement for the America that Joe Biden leaves behind. In a moment, I'll be reunited with Harry Sisson, who was blindly loyal to Biden right to the end. But first, joining me from Washington, D.C. is pollster and political strategist Frank Luntz. Frank, great to see you. You're a very important person to talk to right now because there are polls swirling around all over the place, often giving quite conflicting information. Just first of all, tell me, what impact has Joe Biden's decision not to continue with his presidential race had on the Democrats' chances of winning the election?
It has completely unscrambled and re-scrambled the race. There are key voter groups right now, young women who have been turned off by both candidates that are now absolutely excited. Younger African Americans that were giving Donald Trump a look that they may be going back to the Democrats, which they voted for decades. It doesn't change any of the states. It doesn't change the basic parameters of this election, but it does make it closer. And make no mistake, when you raise $80 million in a single day, when you get thousands and thousands of people signing up to volunteer, you take that seriously. You see the significance of it. I would have predicted exactly 1 week ago today that Donald Trump essentially had the race sewed up. You can't say that today. He's still the favorite, but by a very, very narrow margin. And there is a palpable, measurable honeymoon that's happening for the vice president, Kamala Harris, that could change the outcome of November.
Yeah, I mean, I read a very interesting interview with you with the Times back in the UK last week, in which you identified as the potential tipping point for Trump to beat Biden was that Trump's support would all come out and vote for him, absolutely, to a man and woman. But the Biden support, maybe 1-2% of them may just stay at home because they just weren't enthused enough to go out and vote for him. It may well be that particular part of the equation narrows sharply with Kamala Harris, because the one thing she certainly brought to this race is a renewed energy, and I could certainly see a lot more people feeling enthusiastic enough to go out and vote for her in a way they might have been tempted to stay at home if it was still Joe Biden.
That's exactly correct, and that's why the whole race has changed. Every Trump voter, you knew that he was going to get his polling numbers and maybe even above them. But that Joe Biden, there was just no energy, no excitement. She's brought that to the race. It may not survive. I remind viewers that she had the same kind of energy and excitement in 2019 until she debated Joe Biden. And the public thought there's not much here, that she doesn't have the greatest record to defend as vice president. She was given one responsibility, which is immigration, and she didn't come through on that. And right now, the two issues that matter most, affordability and immigration, Trump has a significant advantage regardless of whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. That said, we've never had an African-American woman, South Asian woman running. Clearly, they're playing into that. Americans like to be part of history. And I'm not willing to make a projection right now because it would be inaccurate and, frankly, unprofessional. She does have a shot.
Yeah, I certainly think it's going to be a much closer race now. In terms of how Trump should handle the new challenge, I spoke to him on Saturday night before Biden quit, just the day before, and he was desperate for Biden to stay in as long as possible because he really genuinely believed if Biden was still the Democrat nominee come November, he would win the election quite easily. But he did say that given the extraordinary series of events in just the last 3 weeks of this race, that 4 months is a very long time in this race, which it is. I mean, certainly the race that everyone said to start with was boring. These two old guys duking it out again has become one of the most electrifying, surprise-ridden races in American presidential history. If you were advising Trump, how would you handle the new challenge?
I would simply tell him to take a very long vacation. Go to one of your golf courses in Scotland and just get away. Donald Trump is Donald Trump's biggest opponent. The words that he says does bring people who never voted Republican before to consider him. And it's not a typical politician's rhetoric. That said, you're running against a woman a woman who has a professional career. The female population has been really energized by her campaign, and it's only been 4 days. And he is too likely to say something that's too offensive that actually hurts him and backfires. And I don't believe that there's anyone around him that says to him, dude, calm down. It's a little bit different. You can take Biden apart. You can't treat her the same way you treat him. Now, he got away with it with Hillary Clinton because voters thought of her differently. My advice to him would be to tread very carefully and to make sure that all of your communication is based on fighting for the American people, not fighting against the vice president. And that's sometimes very hard for him to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a clip of him talking about whether he should stay nice in the race after the people saying after the shooting he suddenly became Mr. Nice Guy. And he said this.
You know, I was supposed to be nice. They say something happened to me when I got shot. I became nice. And when you're dealing with these people, they're very dangerous people. When you're dealing with them, you can't be too nice. You really can't be. So if you don't mind, I'm not going to be nice. Is that okay?
You know, I mean, it's an entirely predictable response. And I've been watching his rhetoric in the last couple of days in particular. He's been actually pretty well on message in terms of going after Kamala Harris about a number of things from her record, which are pretty juicy bones for him to gnaw on. But he can't stop occasionally saying she's dumb as a rock and she's going to be the biggest lunatic ever seen in the White House and stuff. I think it's that kind of language which he just can't stop himself using, but which actually ultimately could be self-defeating, because she's going to come at him repeatedly with all sorts of ad hominem attacks from he's a sexual predator, he's a con man, he's a fake, he's this. We know all this. If he could somehow find it in himself to rise above that fray a little bit and stick purely to policy attacks, I think it would be more effective for him.
You're right, but he can't. I saw the original 45-minute speech. I saw the text at the convention exactly 1 week ago. And it's amazing that it's only 1 week ago. And it was a really strong, very powerful. I've seen every convention speech since 1988. This truly was one of the best. But that's not the speech that he delivered. The fact is, the other 45 minutes that he ad-libbed, that he threw stuff in, hurt his credibility, hurt the idea that he was a unifying candidate. And that's what he does every single day. He delivers some really powerful, effective attacks that voters shake their heads and say, yes, I agree with that. But they're always surrounded, they're always punctuated with some offense, some insult that causes people to recoil. If he doesn't figure out how to do this right, he could lose. And so the question then becomes, with what I would say to the president, sir, do you really want to win this? Or do you want to lose two different races? It's up to him to decide what Donald Trump shows up at these rallies and at whatever debate they have.
Does his decision to choose J.D. Vance as his running mate now look a good decision or not so good in light of the fact Joe Biden's no longer in the race?
For a lot of people, it doesn't look as good. To me, and this is probably the most important part of this interview, there's a segment of the population that no one's talking about, and I don't know if it's because they don't see it. And I call them paycheck to paycheck voters. 24% of America, so it's significant. And it's in every state. People who literally have trouble making ends meet at the end of the week or end of the month. Traditionally, they vote Democrat by 2 to 1 or even more. Donald Trump has made that margin. He's up in the low 40s among these people. Republicans, if they get that vote, they never lose. And Trump has a way to speak to them. And J.D. Vance comes from that group. It's who he is. It's his background. So the question then becomes, who did the Democrats choose for the debate? J.D. Vance will not have a significant impact, because vice presidents never do. In fact, more often than not, they hurt the top of the ticket. The question is, do they choose Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, or Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona? Probably the two best picks. How does he perform in that debate? That will decide whether or not he's successful. But The key component is he understands those people, those paycheck-to-paycheck voters, because he is one.
And it seems to me, talking of debates, that the catalyst for all this mayhem in the last 3.5 weeks was, of course, the CNN debate, where Joe Biden became the emperor with no clothes in front of the American people. And it was very clear. And I remember watching that live, and I saw John King at CNN, who I used to work with over there. And I've never known him be quite so instantly scathing of something he'd just seen involving a Democrat president as he was that night. And I knew then it was basically over, just a question of time. But it does make, I think, the debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris on September the 10th potentially even more consequential and even more gigantic, doesn't it?
I think you have a perfect analysis. I think you really know what's going on. And I know the show's being shot from New York, so clearly you're pulling in the zeitgeist of America in this conversation. He can't treat her the same way that he treated Biden. He will not be given that benefit. And in the end, the rules that Biden forced on him turned out to work in his favor because you couldn't hear his comments, the constant undercutting as Biden was speaking. I don't know if that debate's going to happen. I don't even believe that ABC knows that that debate's going to happen. I think they may put it off. I think it'll be the most watched and most entertaining debate of all time. I think it could be the most negative debate of all time because the two of them will just go at each other and at each other. And what we haven't mentioned is the impact after the election. And that's what I really am most concerned about and why I do so many interviews like this. In the end, do we trust the election results? Does America come together? Do we accept the result and do we move on? And do we continue to tear each other apart? That's what I'm most concerned about because I'm not sure the answers to those questions. I know what Brexit did to the debate in the UK, and I believe it's going to be even rougher over here, Trump versus Harris. And pray for us, Piers, because we're a great democracy.
You know what, though? And you know what? The reason, Frank, I think it has to happen, that debate, is which one of them's going to pull out, right? If Kamala Harris ducks a debate with Trump, I think that would play very badly for her. And conversely, if Trump, the strong man, bottles a debate with Kamala Harris, I think that's really damaging to him. So I don't think there's any possibility of that debate not happening purely for that reason.
Yeah, but Trump's already raised that he doesn't want ABC to do it. He wants Fox to do it. So his claim will be, I don't trust the network. They're biased. They're hostile to him. That won't hold water. But to Trump's voters, that'll be acceptable enough. And in the end, under Biden, there was only 4% of Americans, that's it, who are undecided. That undecided number's gone up a little bit because we have a new candidate, still only 6 or 7%. So we're going to spend $2 billion and hold all these debates in the Democratic convention, basically trying to move 6% of 3 key states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and most importantly, Pennsylvania. That's an awful lot of money. That's an awful lot of airtime for literally 1/4 of 1% of America.
It's incredible when you put it like that. Frank Luntz, brilliant to talk to you. One of the smartest political strategists in America. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it too.
Well, joining me now is the former professional wrestler and Fox News contributor Tyrus and TikTok influencer Harry Sisson. Well, welcome to both of you. Harry, I want to start by playing a little clip of you last time you appeared on my show. Who do you think the 2 nominees will be in the end, and who will win?
Yeah, it's going to be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, and then Joe Biden's going to win. And Piers, I'd love to chat with you after the election.
You've made a few dollars, Harry, so why don't we have a little wager? $10,000 to a charity of your choice. I say Biden can't possibly win. You think he can?
I mean, I personally don't bet on politics. I'm happy to have another bet to do something with charity. We can do something, absolutely no problem.
But you wouldn't put your money where your mouth is on Biden, then?
I don't bet on politics.
Well, I saved you $10,000 there, Harry, with your refusal to accept the bet, obviously. Welcome back to Uncensored. I mean, you were completely wrong. Not only did Biden not stay in the race, but he certainly won't be president again. So do you accept you were completely wrong?
Yeah, I think I was going based off of publicly available information. All of the information available was that Joe Biden was staying in. He consistently told reporters he was staying in. He said, I'm the guy. And then he huddled with advisors in Delaware, saw the data, said it wasn't looking good, and made the honorable decision to bow out.
But with respect, why would a young, dynamic guy like you, how old are you?
21.
You're 21, so you're 60 years younger than Joe Biden.
That's right.
Right, it was blatantly obvious to everybody that Biden was done, especially after the debate. Why would you continue to pretend that he wasn't?
Because I look at the record, I'm always of the view that achievements and policy matters more than like this talk we have in the media of, oh, Biden's this, oh, Biden's that. I've met the man as well. I've talked to him. He was fantastic. He was sharp. I had questions.
When was that?
That was in May.
He was sharp?
Yeah.
How sharp?
Very sharp. He answered
it was around
my
that time
questions
he
in
was
full.
falling off stages, he was face planting, he was tumbling
face planting. I mean,
tumbling
I feel
down the steps of Air Force One, falling off bicycles. He was saying all sorts of gobbledygook in statements which the White House had to rewind. So how sharp was he?
I mean, he was great. I gave him questions he didn't have beforehand. He answered them in depth, and we had a conversation after the cameras were turned off. I had no problems then. I had no problems now. I still think Joe Biden is fit to serve. If he were the candidate, I'd still think he's fit to serve.
Really?
Yeah.
OK, Tyrus, Joe Biden is still fit to serve. I mean, the guy I watched last night doing this national address, I'm sorry, I felt it was really sad. It was elder abuse.
I think at this point, we're arguing about the wrong thing. Whether he's fit to serve or not fit to serve, history was made in the sense that the donors basically said no more money.
Right.
And they don't do that because they think, oh, the polling shows you're down this month. So the ugliness of this is that Joe Biden's legacy is going to be affected because of what happened. The policies and stuff that we're running historically didn't ever fit Joe, which people raise their eyebrows to. And then you're seeing all this cover up of how sharp he was, and that's a interesting word because it's used a lot. And I always find when different people all use the same word, it's a talking point. And that's the problem. We need to get away from talking points. I'm glad that he stepped down because I took no joy in criticizing speeches from somebody who was doing the best they could. And he probably has moments where he's brilliant, but that's the ugliness of aging, that one day everything's going great.
Yeah.
And it's happened to us all. Like one day, like wrestling, I'm throwing guys around, and one day I'm a step slow. It happens. And you'll have good days and you have bad days. And that's great in any other profession but being the president of the United States and basically the policeman of the world.
You know, what I was struck by, Harry, last night was he kept talking about, the threat to democracy and the importance of honesty and integrity in public life and so on. But then he said this about passing the torch. Let's listen to this clip.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. It's the best way to unite our nation.
No, I'm sorry, Harry, that was just a blatant lie. He didn't decide it was time to pass the torch only the day before he quit. He was absolutely gung-ho. I'm going to be running. I'm going to be president. I'm going to win 4 more years, blah, 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 blah. Even in the speech last night, he said he thinks he still has it in him to do another term of office. But that's not what happened. What happened was the Democrat grandees, Barack Obama, the Clintons, Chuck Schumer, Hollywood stars like George Clooney penning op-ed pieces in newspapers and so on, they all collaborated with the donors, as Tyrus said, who yanked the money, to torch him. He was torched by his own side. That's what happened, isn't it?
I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I think that there was obviously concern among party elites, you might call them. I don't know if that's the word.
But well, there was a concern. There was a poll came out on Sunday morning saying he was 7 points down in Michigan.
Right.
As Frank Luntz said, one of the 3 crucial swing states. And at that point, bang, the rope was pulled, right?
But it's also it was also his decision. He could have stayed in the race and said, like, I'm the nominee. I got the votes. I won the primary. I'm going to get the delegates. I'm going to be the nominee. But he looked at the data and made the honorable decision, said, no, I'm not going to.
But is it that honorable to do it now? I mean,
It sounds great, but let's be honest. Nancy Pelosi walked in and said, we can do it.
The easy way or the hard way?
The hard way was Article 25.
You know what it was like? Goodfellas, one of my favourite films, right? And I happen to know Joe Pesci very well through golf. So it's the scene where Joe Pesci thinks he's going to be the made man.
Yes.
Right? And the whole build-up, goes thing, and he goes in and they whack him, right? I think that's what happened with Joe Biden on Sunday.
I think to say that it's like, oh, it's not honorable because it's taking place now, I think is a little bit disingenuous.
Well, I only say that because the other 2 Democrat incumbent presidents since World War II who have resigned in election year and decided not to vote, did it massively earlier in the process, did it at the start of the year, which gave their replacement the chance to really build proper momentum. By giving Kamala Harris only 4 months, you know, it could end up being, we don't know yet, and she might well turn it round and she might win. So let's put that caveat there. But if she was to lose quite badly, you could look back at it and say that had he pulled out a lot earlier, it would have given her a better chance.
But I think we can both agree that the political circumstances back then with like a Lyndon Johnson was different than now, right? The reason it's happening now...
Well, not really. In his case, it was the Vietnam War had made him very unpopular, so they thought he would lose. Right here, Joe Biden's physical and cognitive state made him increasingly unpopular. And despite all the achievements that people like you queue up to tell us he made, and I'm not disputing some of them are genuine achievements, but his approval rating's at 37%. I keep hearing this week, he's the greatest president of modern times. Why is he so unpopular then? Why is people not just literally, why are there not parades in the streets for the greatest president of all time? Well, it's 37% approval.
We know the reason. Historically, the American people will blame the commander-in-chief for things that are often out of their control. So inflation and gas prices, I think anybody who's honest will recognize that Joe Biden obviously didn't cause those things, that those things are global factors. Inflation spiked in Great Britain at the same time.
All the financial problems in his final year, but it was the pandemic.
I agree, and I wouldn't blame him for that.
Democrats, Tyrus, from memory, queued up to blame him.
The first day he got in office and shut down the oil pipe, he hit the green light for Russia and China. He changed the dynamic of the oil. When he who controls the oil controls the way things go. So he made a lot of, but again, I don't believe that these policies were Joe Biden's. I believe that the real issue is that whether it was Kamala Harris or whomever made decisions and the president wasn't unable to. And we saw that. The debate is the reason why he's out. They pulled the money and they said enough. Here's the part. Barack Obama, he is a constitutionalist to the 10th power. Like he won't endorse. And I don't think his endorsement is based off he doesn't think she can win, like those reports are. I think he doesn't like the way the process was. I think we're seeing a split.
There are reports today. So just before we came on air,
there's two reports, and you can have the same thought on the same thing. He can say he doesn't think she could win, and he can also endorse her.
Yeah, I think he will endorse. I mean, the idea that Barack Obama is not going to endorse
that speaks volumes.
A black woman
who is
the nominee.
But in defense of him, I think he's looking at he doesn't like the process. I think he wanted an open debate.
And would that have been better for the Democrats, do you think?
I think it would have been better in terms of showing Kamala doing her own thing. Because the Republican side, we've made huge mistakes, and I thought it wasn't possible. I thought, after the assassination attempt, after the speech, but literally the VP pick didn't help. Talking about her as a woman, whether she has children or not, moronic and stupid. I don't know why the Republican Party politicians seem to think the answer to getting votes is telling women what and not to do with their body. That's stupid. Like we had a 40-point lead.
Hang on, you're agreeing with each other.
I'm agreeing with what you're saying right now.
It's not hard. Like, listen, I'm not a tent guy. I'm too big for that shit. You know that. So I call balls and strikes, and we were sitting in a great position, and now no one's going to talk about the fact that Biden's policies weren't his, or investigating who was doing what and what was Jill's role and who's this role. Now we're going to be talking about Trump insulting a woman.
Yeah.
So you literally, all the work, we've got this huge lead. And if we just stuck to policy and deeds and let them call him a felon, and because Americans, when they call him that, they respond with what? They send more money.
I agree.
Insult the person.
There's a new campaign ad out on behalf of Kamala Harris. Let's take a look at this.
In this election, we each face a question. What kind of country do we want to live in? There are some people who think we should be a country of chaos, of fear, of hate. But us, we choose something different. We choose freedom.
Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose.
You know, Harry, my mother, who's just turned 80, very youthful, glamorous 80, I might add, but she messaged me yesterday saying, what do you think of Kamala Harris? She seems to have added a lot of energy to this race, which I thought was a really interesting observation. Whether you like her, don't like her, agree with her, don't agree with her, there's unbelievable amount of new energy in this Democrat side of the race, because she is 20 years younger than Biden, obviously on her game, she's smart, she's presentable, she's good on TV, she's galvanizing people, the money's pouring in and so on. Do you believe, though, that once that honeymoon period inevitably quietens down and there's a more forensic analysis of her record, do you worry that she is too far left in her record to actually avoid Trump stomping all over her politically?
Not at all. I think that the idea that she's just like this progressive liberal who only sides with progressives and doesn't reach across the aisle is nonsense. I mean, she's been part of the Biden administration.
She was rated more left than Bernie Sanders.
I mean, I think that if we actually look at the policy on an individual level, that's not the case. Bernie Sanders is like for Medicare for all. Kamala Harris has never endorsed such system. So I think we actually have to look at the policy, and that tells a different story. But her record is certainly not a progressive one in the sense that it's like a Bernie Sanders kind of policy. She was a district attorney, a prosecutor. She sent people to jail. She's definitionally in favor of the rule of law.
She also wanted to defund the police. That's not great.
She's never come out and said, let's defund the police.
She effectively did.
Well, effectively and saying are two different things.
OK, I mean, look, the other thing she was clearly billed as the immigration border czar, right, well, Tyrus, which they're now trying to deny ever calling him, but it's a brilliant thing I saw. I think it was Newsbusters did it, or somebody did it. They did a mashup of all the people on the left saying, well, they never called her the border czar. Right. You have them all calling her the border czar. And that's been gold. A disaster.
That is gold, and that should be on every campaign ad with Republicans. But as soon as we stop talking about policy and get it, because Kamala's going to want a street fight, because Trump will beat her up in a street fight, and he will say all kinds of stuff that we'll be like, oh, that's hilarious, and independents will be like, oh, that's not okay. Yeah. So they want a street fight.
I agree.
And if it's hard,
she's already goading it,
and she's hit me. It's not, let's go.
It really
Please
is.
Hit me.
It literally is hands down.
I dare you. I dare you.
Come after a black woman if you want.
Yeah, because it's going to look bad. But if he doesn't take the bait like he did, he showed great restraint in the Biden debate. He could have attacked him. He went at him. He made the one comment, which I thought for him was he showed great restraint. He was compassionate even in the sense that he didn't go after him or make fun of him, which would have been a horrible mistake. And if he goes in a debate with Kamala and starts calling her dumb or even the horrible women, it's going to be a mistake. Policy. That's what the American people want to hear. We're tired of it, and you can't run one side's deceiving and not doing what they need to do.
Why are you shaking your head?
Because we win on policy. Like I want it to be a policy conversation.
I'll take that bet.
I agree. I think we're the party of pro-choice. We're the party of capping insulin at $35 a month. We're the party of fighting climate change. We're the party of investing in infrastructure. So I want a policy conversation.
When does that insulin kick in? Because I have a type 1 diabetic at home, and I'm still waiting
for seniors on Medicare.
35.
Well, Joe Biden's trying to, I guess it's going to be Kamala Harris as the nominee, wants to expand it to all Americans, not just seniors on Medicare. That's our agenda. I think
so her record is his record.
Well, they work together.
That's all you need, President Trump. Just run on the record.
I agree. Look at the largest investment in infrastructure since Eisenhower, largest investment in fighting climate change in world history. And as we mentioned, capping insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare. If you want that to be her record, I'm there.
Yeah, none of that happened. But
listen, can we all agree on one thing? This race just got a lot more interesting.
I think it got worse. I think we're going to see the worst in everybody. It's sad, yeah.
That is the fear, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's clear Kamala is going low deliberately, and the big question we probably all know the answer, is can Trump rise above it? And I'm not convinced he has that valve.
It's going to be,
but we shall see.
Be difficult.
Guys, thank you very much. Good to talk to you both. Right. Well, I'm joined now by the host of Michael Knowles' show, Michael Knowles, Wajahat Ali from the Democracy-ish podcast, and the Republican spokeswoman, Elizabeth Pipko. Welcome to all of you. Elizabeth Pipko, let me start with you. How concerned are you that the mood music has moved from hero Trump survives assassin's bullet and polls are surging and there's no way he could possibly lose to old man Biden, to suddenly now all the talk is resurgent Democrats, younger nominee, galvanizing support in a way that Biden never could. You must be concerned as a party, aren't you?
I wouldn't say concerned. If I'm being honest, we all see the excitement behind Kamala Harris. We all know what it means to have a movement like this because we have our own, right? We know what it means when you can raise record amounts of donations. We know what it means when people come out in droves to your rallies. I don't think what she has compares to the movement behind Donald Trump, but I 100% agree it's a different race than it was against Joe Biden. At the same time, I was just watching your show with Harry and Tyrus, and I think everything Tyrus said remains true. We fight on policy and policy alone. The American people are not happy with the policies they've seen from this administration. Kamala Harris owns that record. She was a part of that ticket, a part of that administration, and on policy alone, we hands down will win this election.
The problem, it seems to me, is that Donald Trump can call Joe Biden dumb as a rock or a lunatic, and nobody really cares. But the moment he starts saying it about Kamala Harris, even I'm wincing a bit. It's like it's not a good look. It's kind of, for want of a better phrase, it's kind of ungentlemanly. And so his narrative and rhetoric has to change, doesn't it, Elizabeth? I mean, you wouldn't like being called dumb as a rock, would you?
I definitely would not, though it happens quite a bit. I won't lie to you. Look, I 100% agree. I think that the debate that we saw against Joe Biden has to be a very good starting point for the next 3 months, which we didn't expect to be the campaign that it will inevitably be now. I think Donald Trump proved that he's able to keep substance at the forefront of the debate, on the forefront of his mind. And I think, like you said, that is the only way to win this fight. The American people are sick of being as divided and as attacked as we constantly have been for the last 4 years. And I truly think the only way forward is to leave those attacks behind. I certainly will never utter any words like that from my mouth. That's not what I believe in. That's not the America that I want. And I think the best foot forward is a strict policy debate. That's all that matters at this point. The American people know that they're not happy with the policies the Democrats have put forward. They want Donald Trump to be there to answer their questions and solve their problems. And that is, like you said, the only way that he's going to win this fight.
Before I turn to the other two for their response to this, have you had this conversation with Donald Trump? Have you said to him, dial it down with that kind of chat about Kamala Harris?
I personally have not. I can tell you he talks regularly with people around him, and he's also incredibly intuitive. He knows what kind of race this is. I believe him when he says he wants nothing but unity moving forward. I believe the assassination attempt changed him as a human. I believe he wants to win this race. I believe he wants to save this country and make it better. And I believe he knows the best way to do that. And I do believe we'll see a different Donald Trump moving forward because he knows what he needs to do to win the race. And that is a calmer, more focused, more substantive debate and more substantive Donald Trump.
OK, let's go to the other two. Michael Knowles, there's no doubt the dynamic of this race has changed. Do you think it's going to change the result?
I don't think so. I don't think you're really seeing that in the polls. In the polls, Trump is still looking pretty good, especially in the swing states, and especially when you consider the distinction between the Electoral College and the popular vote. I think this is why you have some leading Democrats who are saying that they actually don't want to be the vice president. They don't want to be the running mate. They don't really want to challenge Kamala. And so there is some new energy. I totally agree with that. But Kamala has some major vulnerabilities here. As you pointed out, Piers, in the previous segment, Kamala was the most liberal member of the Senate when she was there. Your previous guest, Harry Sisson, said something that wasn't true. He said that she was not for Medicare for all. She was. You can see it on her Medium blog page from 2019, My Plan for Medicare for All. And she was far to the left on so many other issues. The other big vulnerability is that though the Democrats want to deny it now, in March of 2021, President Biden said that Kamala Harris was going to be in charge of the border policy. So, they're trying to change their news stories on it. But he said, I'm putting her in the lead of immigration. That has been the most monumental failure of the Biden administration, and it ranks toward the top of people's issues.
Someone did a big mashup, and it had all the liberal commentators and anchors at CNN, MSNBC, and so on, all denying yesterday that she'd ever been called the border czar, and then someone had clipped up evidence that their own networks had indeed called her the border czar. And I think that's a really significant debate to be had, because it's indisputable that she was depicted that way. And there's no doubt if you then accept that she was the border czar, that her management of the border as the czar has been a complete and utter disaster.
Of course. Piers, I actually have Biden's exact words. I just finished broadcasting my own show, and I even second-guessed myself. I said, maybe I misunderstood. I seem to recall every news organization reporting this, but maybe I was wrong. No, he said on March 24th, I have asked her, the VP today, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle, and the countries that are going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border. It's not her full responsibility and job, but she's leading the effort. And he even turns to her, he says, Madam Vice President, thank you. I gave you a tough job. So it is a tough job. She totally failed, and they got to answer for it.
Yeah, I mean, Wajahat, there's no doubt she was put in charge of solving the border crisis. We've just heard it from Biden's own voice. Why are people on the left trying to deny that?
We're not trying to deny anything. We have a prosecutor against a predator, and now the oldest person to ever run for president, Donald Trump, who, by the way, did not do a 180 after surviving the assassination attempt. He did a 360. He's exactly the same person he was. You're talking about Axios. Axios referred to her as the border czar, and then Axios later corrected itself yesterday. Look, if I'm the Democrats, I'd run on the border compared to Trump? Sure. You know why? Because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris proposed one of the strictest immigration reform bills that they had the bipartisan unity with conservatives. And guess who tanked it? Donald Trump. Republicans said that Donald Trump called them up and decided to tank this border bill, this bipartisan border bill, because he knew it would help Joe Biden. So a person who does not care about security and the border, that's Donald Trump. Also, as of today, the lowest border crossings, even lower than Donald Trump, is happening in what? The Biden-Harris administration. And talking about immigration and the border, guess who wants to deport up to 15 million people illegally? Donald Trump. He's running on it. Guess who wants to create camps? Donald Trump. So I'm perfectly fine with liberals and this growing multiracial, multicultural coalition. Like you said, Piers, there's enthusiasm, there's excitement, especially with women, with young people, with people of color against Donald Trump. And I don't think Donald Trump can stop being Donald Trump. It just took 3 days, and we saw the RNC conference, the first 30 minutes of the speech. He was doing pretty well. And then he did 9,000 words off script. And he talked about Hannibal Lecter, and he mocked Nancy Pelosi with the hammer. He called her crazy. He did the post on Truth Social. He misspelled poll with poll. He called lying Kamala. And then Mike Johnson, Piers, the leader of the House Republicans, had to tell his party to not be racist. When you're off the gate starting like that, you're on the losing tip. That's my prediction.
All right, Elizabeth, there's a lot to unpack there from Wajahat, as you'd imagine. I mean, it was a brilliantly valiant attempt at hiding the fact that Kamala Harris said to the world, don't come in, and then 8 million people have probably come in. By any yardstick, whether you're Democrat or Republican, the Biden administration's handling of the southern border has been a fiasco, and her name is on that. It was her job, as we heard from Michael there, from the words of President Biden. She was the border czar.
She was. And I believe you said 8 million. People believe it's actually possible that it's much higher than that. Look, we can go back and forth for hours and debate the fact that she was the border czar or wasn't the border czar. The fact is that people are unhappy with the border, right? Polling shows that people are unhappy with the state of this country, and the border and immigration is one of those main issues on their mind. The current administration, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, take full responsibility for that. I don't think anyone is going to believe that Kamala and Joe Biden are not responsible for this. And I think it's silly to go back and forth and claim something otherwise. For us, it's simply about policy and it's about the facts. And I understand going back and forth about personality and Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris and what attacks will come out and what won't. But the fact is, today, the American people say they're unhappy with several policies from this administration. They're unhappy with several things going on in this country and around the world. And this administration has full blame for all of that.
OK, Michael Knowles, there's no doubt, notwithstanding all this, that the race has changed in the sense of a lot more energy for the Democrats, a lot more youth in their candidate than they had before. And it's going to be, I would imagine, it's going to be a closer race than it could have been. Donald Trump, as we've heard from other guests today, one of his biggest opponents is himself and his mouth. How careful does he have to be, do you think, in terms of how he talks to Kamala Harris? Particularly if, for example, they do get it on a debate stage in September, because if we thought the last debate was electric and consequential in the way it went down, you can only imagine how big it's going to be with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris standing there for 90 minutes. So how careful does he have to be?
Trump needs to change the way that he speaks based on whether he's speaking to a man or a woman. Of course, this is true. Trump knows this. He ran against a woman in 2016, and he beat a woman in 2016. And Republicans, unlike our Democrat friends, do know the difference between men and women. So, of course, he's going to have to use different rhetoric. But I'm not all concerned about it. I think he's going to do just fine. When they tried to hammer him on rude language to women in 2016, of course, he said, I only use that language about Rosie O'Donnell, and he sort of laughed it off, and it seemed to work out just fine. Meanwhile, you're going to hear the rhetoric of Kamala Harris. She's going to, it seems, continue this campaign theme that Trump is an existential threat to democracy that Biden has been pushing. That, of course, established the premise that would justify the assassination attempt. So I think think that's perilous rhetorical ground for the Democrats. And then you're going to hear a lot of vague rhetoric. The famous line from Kamala, the only one we hear repeated over and over, is that she wants to imagine what can be unburdened by what has been. You saw in Kamala's first campaign commercial, it's all just about freedom in the abstract. Yes, she runs on abortion. Yes, she runs on guns, issues that she can always harp on in the future. But she doesn't run on anything else that is specific, because her record on the economy, on her administration's record on national security, on the border, on foreign affairs, it's so dismal. She doesn't seem to have a vision that resonates with people. That's why when she ran for president, she had to get out of the race before the first primary.
Yeah, I mean, Wajahat, there's a lot.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
Sure.
Respond. No, you respond. It's fine. You respond.
Well, my response to your question, Donald Trump is a 78-year-old man. He will not change. We have covered him for 9 years. He will not change. He survived an assassination attempt. He did not change. Even at the RNC, he could not stay disciplined. If I'm Republicans, I'm very worried because I believe Donald Trump has peaked. He survived the assassination attempt. He had that heroic photo. He had the bandage on the ear. He had the whole world behind him at the RNC. He coronated, J.D. Vance as the VP. You had the whole RNC convention. And all of that is now gone. All of that is deflated. And also, he has a terrible track record because, unlike 2016, he takes credit for overturning Roe v. Wade. And he has appointed J.D. Vance, who, as your last guest said, is attacking women for being mean, childless cat ladies, for being miserable. I'm telling you that women are paying attention to the point that even Jennifer Aniston, yes, Rachel herself, who doesn't get involved in politics, was horrified yesterday and posted that clip of J.D. Vance. The attack on women, the attack on women's rights, the fact that now a jury of his peers has said that he is liable for rape against E. Jean Carroll and defamation, and he's a criminal convict, and the fact he's a fraudster. He owes New York over $400 million. He's on parole. He can't vote in Florida. And the fact that there's misogynist attacks for the last 3 days. I'm telling you, Piers, in America, women, even independents, Republican women, are horrified by this. This is the man who said he grabs women by the pee and, it's just locker room talk. It's 2024. I'm telling you, a lot of women were pissed. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. Republican Party have underestimated the righteous rage of women. And I believe women have remembered, and I believe women and young people in particular will come after Donald Trump and support Kamala Harris. He will not change. They're stuck with him.
All right, Elizabeth, why is it? Let's just play again the clip of him talking about whether he should be nice or not, because it's kind of relevant to this, about whether he feels he ought to change. Let's take a look.
I was supposed to be nice. They say something happened to me when I got shot. I became nice. And when you're dealing with these people, they're very dangerous people. When you're dealing with them, you can't be too nice. You really can't be. So if you don't mind, I'm not going to be nice. Is that okay?
So, Elizabeth, does he want to change? I mean, he was almost mocking the idea that people were saying, he's going to be going through a life-changing thing and blah, blah, blah. I've got to say, I spoke to him on Saturday. He didn't sound like he changed much to me. And I've known him nearly 20 years. But, of course, he would argue that part of his appeal, why he's so popular again, when everyone thought he was dead and buried a year and a half ago, the reason he's back surging away in the polls, and in fact has never had a higher popularity number than he has today, is because he is authentic. He's true to himself. He is a bit of a badass. He does speak from, shoot from the hip when he talks, and he says a lot of stuff which shocks people, makes people laugh. He's not the conventional politician. Is it actually politically wise for him to try and change and suddenly be Mr. Nice Guy, maybe holding babies and, cuddling cats?
I don't think we'll ever see him cuddling a cat. But I mean, look, the multiple things can be true at once. He could, like Michael said, realize he's talking to a woman at this debate and realize that he might have to change his strategy a little bit, but also realize that, like you said, he is a badass and that's why people love him. Everything that has been mentioned about him in these last 5 minutes was true a couple of weeks ago. I know Joe Biden was then the candidate, but like you said, Donald Trump was polling at record numbers for him, the best he'd ever been doing politically since he first announced in 2015. So clearly it does work for him. I don't think I would want to change if I was, coming back after I don't even know how many times people said that he was, dead and gone and his career was over in politics. So I understand people that say that he should change. I understand people that say he should not change. I think the only person that can make the proper decision here is Donald Trump. He has a very good political instinct, which is why he's still around and why he's the Republican nominee right now, despite, like you said, countless people thinking he would not be. I think for us, it's about strategy, like you said, policy, policy, policy. And for him, it's about realizing that there is maybe a middle ground, but that the badass that is Donald Trump is the reason that Donald Trump is here right now. And I agree with you. He will never lose that part of him, and he will certainly never cuddle a cat.
No, I don't think he will. Now, Wajahat, we've done a bit of research while we've been on air because you were very clear that people on the left had not said Kamala was the border czar and are now trying to wriggle off the hook. So we've got a little mashup which Newsbusters had prepared for the delectation of the world. Let's take a look.
Border czar. Vice President Harris was not a border czar.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People are going to have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
They were very critical of Kamala Harris, especially in her role as border czar.
Now what she's up against is folks lying about her border record, calling her a border czar.
Kamala Harris, who was appointed as the border czar.
The Biden team didn't declare her the border czar. They wanted her to work on kind of the root causes of immigration.
There has been so much criticism against Kamala Harris. She was the border czar.
Calling her sort of the border czar, which wasn't necessarily the case.
So the border, if they weren't planning to address it in a major way, do not make her your border czar. She met with some of the Northern Triangle countries, but nothing has effectively changed.
Now, Wajahat, would you like to review your emphatic denial that ever happened?
Last time I checked, I don't think I talked about the border czar. I don't think you showed a single clip of President Biden calling her a border czar. I don't think you showed a single clip of Kamala Harris.
You didn't qualify. You said it was only Axios. You said only Axios.
No, yesterday.
There we have every major network in America saying one thing, and they're trying to deny it. They all called her the border czar. And the reason they all want to try and deny it now is because they realize it's incredibly damaging to Kamala Harris if it is seen by the American people that she was indeed in charge of sorting out the border problem and presided over a complete disaster. So it's actually a critical thing here, and I'm bemused why the media is trying to pretend they didn't say what they said. All of them.
Well, two things real quick. When you were talking about that one publication yesterday that flip-flopped, I gave you the name. It's Axios that flip-flopped.
Yeah.
And the media, like you said, which is not trusted by either... Wait. The media that is not trusted by either the liberals or Republicans said a lot of stuff, and they're the ones calling her the border czar, but Joe Biden never did. Kamala Harris never did. She was not the border czar. She had a responsibility to talk to these countries, specifically Central American countries, to see if they can engage in policy to reduce the flow of migrants. But facts matter. Right now, the lowest crossing of migrants, even lower than Trump.
Hang on, Wajahat. Hang on. Facts do matter. So, Michael, can you, for the benefit of Wajahat, who clearly wasn't listening to you earlier, can you repeat what Joe Biden said about Kamala Harris in relation to her job?
I'll add in another line, too, which I excluded earlier. Wajahat, you just said that Biden never made her the border czar or put her in charge of the border. Quote, March 24th, 2021, I've asked her, the VP today, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle, and the countries that are going to need help in stemming the movement of many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border. It's not her full responsibility and job, but she's leading the effort. When she speaks for me. He imbues her with presidential authority, and then he turns to her, Madam Vice President, thank you, I gave you a tough job. Wajahat, what about that is confusing?
Okay.
One I can
last chance,
understand English. I was an English major.
Throw your hands up and admit you were wrong.
No, I know that you guys are doing the RNC's work for them. I know you're trying to help Trump, who's struggling right now.
Facts matter, you said.
No, facts matter. You said you all are saying that she's the border czar, and I have ears, and I heard that, and she is not the border czar. She literally was given that responsibility. She's not the border czar. And if you want to play on immigration, I will gladly play on immigration. Please explain to me why Donald Trump called up Republicans and told them to tank what would have been the strictest bipartisan immigration bill, in which he said would help President Biden, and Republicans bent the knee. So, instead of helping security,
I don't mind you playing whataboutery, but actually it has been Joe Biden's presidency
I'm not.
for
Let's
the
just
last
have
3.5
facts.
years.
Wajahat, I'm happy to
when
give
it
you an
comes
answer.
to facts,
The
Wajahat,
reason...
you're on slightly slippery ground today, I have to say. I want to change subject now, and I want to move to Benjamin Netanyahu's appearance yesterday in Congress. Wajahat, I will start with you here, because I can imagine you were probably not one of the people joining in the wild celebrations of people in Congress at Netanyahu's speech.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most unpopular leader in Israel. 72% of Israelis don't like him. The family members of the hostages, Israeli hostages, don't like him and protest to him. He is one of the most hated leaders in all the world, and he came to the United States of America, gaslit America, spent lies about America, tried to get American money for his failed war, tried to get America again to engage in another war on Israel's behalf, send U.S. troops and U.S. money to fight this war in Iran. And I think most people were horrified and disgusted by it. He lied about his track record, took zero responsibility for his failures in this war, his failure to bring back the hostages, lied, things that we've talked about on your show, Piers, for the past 10 months, the civilian casualties, the death of 40,000 people. He tried to minimize all of that. And look, the Republicans, like lapdogs, ate it up. They applauded him. I thought it was very shameful, especially as he mocked and ridiculed even U.S. citizens who are protesting. You could disagree with the protest, but he called them Hamas. Does that include the Jewish protesters? Does that include the family members of the hostages who flew here from Israel to protest him? And also, I want to remind people that Israel itself, Israel's top security intelligence officials, sent a letter to the United States asking U.S. Congress not to host Netanyahu because they said, not me, they said Netanyahu is an existential threat to Israel. Republicans lapped it up, gave him hooting and hollering, standing ovation. Shameful sight to see. Shameful sight to see.
OK, Michael Knowles, I mean, I've got to admit, I found it a little unpalatable, the scale of the kind of celebratory mood towards Netanyahu, given what has happened in this war since last October. I've always said Israel had an absolute fundamental right and duty to defend itself after the horrific terror attack of October the 7th. But the overwhelming scale has struck me as increasingly disproportionate, and there's no apparent plan for what happens to the people of Gaza at the end of all this. Most of Gaza has now been destroyed, and the ongoing deaths of innocent people continue unabated, while everyone is distracted by what's happening over here in America. I mean, there's a way to support someone who runs one of the great allies of America without looking like it was a celebration of the way that Israel has perpetrated the war, isn't there?
Certainly. I think part of the reason that especially Republicans in Congress were welcoming to Prime Minister Netanyahu is because so many leftists in America have reacted so violently even against the notion of Israeli self-defense and in favor of the pro-Palestine movement. So Wajahat mentions gaslighting. The only gaslighting I saw yesterday was the gaslighting on the American flags at Union Station when the pro-Palestine protesters lit it on fire. I think that kind of imagery is why so many Americans are willing to take Israel's side in this. And so I totally agree with you, Piers. I mean, Israel is its own country, and we have interests that overlap in some ways, and we have interests that diverge in some ways. And I don't think the American people want to go to war in Iran or pursue regime change in Iran or anything like that. But when Prime Minister Netanyahu says that they're Americans acting as useful idiots for Iran, and these are Americans who are in league with people who are burning the American flag, that raises a lot of eyebrows, and it's going to lead people to support the other side.
Yeah, Elizabeth, what was your overview of yesterday? Because everyone has, again, a fundamental right to peacefully protest, but that should not extend to brazenly supporting Hamas, as some of those protesters were doing. And again, I ask you the same question. Did you feel entirely comfortable with the scale of the ovation that Netanyahu was getting yesterday?
It's interesting. I haven't thought about your second question. No one's asked me that. And when I watched, I didn't think about that. However, when you say it, if I'm being completely honest, I was uncomfortable with what I saw in Congress when they were waving Ukrainian flags and celebrating aid to Ukraine. So, yeah, I think I'm a little uncomfortable when I see anyone showing some kind of loyalty or excitement for a country when we have to focus on what's going on here. And when, like was mentioned, what happened in Israel, what's been going on for 9 months now has caused as much pain as it has. That being said, Benjamin Netanyahu is the democratically elected leader of one of our strongest and closest allies. And I think worse than the celebration, as you called it in Congress yesterday, was the fact that many elected officials were not there, the fact that Kamala Harris was not there, and the fact that Bibi Netanyahu had to stand there and applaud those that stand for the American flag while our own people outside were burning the American flag and screaming that Hamas is coming. So there's many things that we can say about yesterday. There's a lot going on, obviously, but I find it incredibly uncomfortable, incredibly sad, and appalling, if I'm being honest, to see the reaction to a leader of our ally in this country after everything that's going on, and knowing full well that Americans are being held hostage right now as well. And a good relationship with Israel and with Bibi Netanyahu could ensure that those hostages come home. So I think it was inappropriate at best, but disgraceful, honestly, at worst, if we're talking about everything that went on yesterday.
Donald Trump is obviously, he saw Benjamin Netanyahu. He's a big supporter of Israel. He did a lot of work in that region when he was president. As with all these things, Donald Trump makes it sound easy to fix the problem. But it's not easy, is it? I mean, Elizabeth, it's going to be an incredibly difficult and complex and probably very long-running issue to try and resolve what has happened in Israel and Gaza since the events of October the 7th.
I would only assume that it would be. Look, it can't be easy to fix anything that's gone on in our world or anything that's happened in the last 4 years of this Biden administration. However, I think Donald Trump's record speaks for itself. He has spoken for wanting peace for many years, peace through strength, as he calls it. And despite all the attacks on him, despite everyone saying that moving the embassy would cause mass chaos and everything else that he did, meeting with Kim Jong-un, etc., he did have peace during those 4 years. And since Joe Biden has come in, we've seen the opposite. I'm not sitting here and saying anyone can fix either conflict in Ukraine or in Gaza in 24 hours. But I will say that after the last 4 years that we have seen, I can only imagine the American people want a change and to give someone else a chance, because the war in Ukraine is ongoing with no end in sight. Obviously, what's going on in Gaza has no end in sight, with Americans being held and dozens of Americans being murdered on October 7th. And people have every right to want someone to come in and put a stop to all of this.
OK, look, I want to just bring in another guest and then get the panel's reaction after I finish this interview. I'm joined by the Republican South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Now, Nancy Mace, thank you very much indeed for joining me. You made a lot of headlines because during the hearing of the then Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle, before she sensationally resigned, you said this.
Most of my questions are going to demand a yes or no answer. Do you understand?
I do.
Okay, my first question. Both sides of the aisle today have asked for your resignation. Would you like to use my 5 minutes to draft your resignation letter, yes or no?
No, thank you.
Was this a colossal failure?
It was a failure.
Yes or no? Was it a colossal failure is the question, yes or no?
I have admitted this is a terrible
This is a yes or no series of questions. Was this a colossal failure, yes or no?
Yes.
Have you provided all audio and video recordings in your possession to this committee, as we asked on July 15th, yes or no?
I would have to get back to you.
That is a no. You're full of shit today. You're just being completely dishonest.
Mr. Chairman, I want to.
Come on.
We have to maintain decorum in this committee.
You are being dishonest or lying. You're being dishonest here with this committee. These are important questions that the American people want answers to, and you're just dodging and talking around it in generalities. And we had to subpoena you to be here, and you won't even answer the questions. We have asked you repeatedly to answer our questions. This isn't hard.
Well, I have to say, Nancy Mace, I did think you spoke for most of us when you used that expletive. Just on the decorum point, do you wish with hindsight you hadn't used that language, or do you think it pretty well hit the nail on the head?
I could have said much worse, Piers, on Monday. My frustrations were deep, and I believe I was simply saying aloud what every person watching that hearing across the country and the world was feeling that day, because here is a woman who is the director of the Secret Service and would not, either could not, would not, was unable or unwilling to answer even the simplest of questions on Monday. Like, she couldn't even tell us the number of Secret Service agents on the ground protecting Donald Trump at the rally that day. And you saw hand-wringing by Republicans and Democrats alike. Both sides, by the end of the day, most of us had called for her resignation. She sat there brazen, defiant, and basically gave a middle finger to middle America on Monday, and she deserved everything that I gave her.
It was a pretty shocking performance after a pretty shocking failure by the agency on the day that Donald Trump was shot. When you saw what she was doing in front of you guys, saw how she was obfuscating, saw how she wasn't answering really any questions, did it show you that there is something fundamental wrong with the Secret Service at the moment in terms of its structure and leadership?
Absolutely, but I think this is fundamental. This is a fundamental problem across many of our federal agencies. And the thing that I walked away with, and I had 24 hours to think about it after I filed my articles of impeachment. By the way, I was going to force a vote on ousting her and firing her within 48 hours. But the thing that really struck me a few hours after the hearing was perhaps they didn't share any information with her because of anticipation of her testifying before Congress. And if that's what happened, if that was the case, if that's why she couldn't answer our questions, the problem's even bigger than I imagined. The obfuscating, this is clearly dishonest actions. They're trying to hide information from us, and she's going to be part of the cover-up, and we've got to get to the bottom of it. And I'm glad to see Speaker Mike Johnson create a task force specific to this investigation, because we all deserve answers, and we ought to know that they're going to do everything they can to ensure no one tries to shoot Donald Trump ever again.
Right. I mean, I've got to say, I've seen some baffling things in my time as a journalist over 4 decades. I cannot remember anything quite as inexplicable as what went down on that day that Donald Trump was shot. And, we now discover from the FBI boss's testimony yesterday that this kid, who's 20 years old, we know so little about him, which in itself is so weird, that he was flying a drone over the stage area where Donald Trump was due to speak 2 hours before. And nobody from the Secret Service appeared to notice or do anything to try and work out who was flying this drone. Then he just ambles up onto this roof, which is clearly, to even the most amateur security observer, would be the most obvious place for an assassin to put themselves if they wanted to get a clear shot at President Trump. He's able to take his gun up there. We have members of the public warning officials that they can see this kid on this roof. There are Secret Service snipers with trained sights on him who've seen him, but he still gets off at least 8 bullets. None of this makes any sense to me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist until I believe there's a theory that can be proven. But none of this makes any sense. Right. How did this happen?
Well, I think it's one of two things, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist either. It's either incompetency or it's conspiracy. And I made the point in the hearing on Monday that between the time that they took their first photo and saw him on deck at the rally, 57 minutes went by between the time they took the first photo, the first agent took the first photo, and the first shots were fired. Now, the 20-year-old Crooks was killed within seconds. So clearly, it seems like logic would tell you they had him in their sights also. So it is baffling, which is why it's so important that we get transparency. And unfortunately, we're not getting it from federal agents. We are getting more information from local law enforcement on the ground, who also informed us that the Secret Service missed an important security briefing that morning, the morning of the rally. We also know that building wasn't swept, even though it was used as a staging location for law enforcement. So this law enforcement were buzzing around. People were buzzing around. Individuals saw him. This was able to happen, and no one did anything about it. And so more than one person should probably resign. We need to force testimony by Secretary Mayorkas, and we need to hear from whistleblowers who have information that can piece the puzzle together that the federal government refuses to do today.
Are you concerned, as some people have been, about the impact of a DEI policy with the Secret Service? When you looked at the way that and I don't want to single out the female agents. I'm sure they're all highly trained and as elite as the men in the Secret Service. But there was something really uncomfortable about watching the interaction and behaviour of those female agents at the front of the car, in particular the one who couldn't even apparently holster her gun properly several times. That imagery does not send to the world a confidence that the presidents of the United States, previous or current or future, are being protected by the world's most elite agents.
Right. And even former Director Cheadle said on Monday she didn't have any quotas, but we know because we have the receipts, it was over 33% that she required to be female agents. Now the thing that really worse than the video, Piers, was the harrowing image of Donald Trump with his fist in the air is an image that will go down iconically in history. But the one thing that really disturbed me from that image was the female agent trying her best to cover up Donald Trump, but she left his entire head, his face, his heart, all exposed. So if there was another shooter, a second shooter, she was unable physically to lift him up off the ground because she was too small, but also she left all of his major organs exposed. So if he were to get shot in that position, he would have been killed. And that, to me, I'm sure there are many women who are trained in Secret Service or in law enforcement who are taller than 5 feet and who could cover him up and help him keep him protected in that particular gesture. That was really disturbing for me to watch.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd be saying this from the start because although it was an iconic image of defiance by Donald Trump, he should never have been allowed to do it. You know, when he was taken down by the Secret Service, their next move collectively should have been to gut him off that stage and into a car and out of there as fast as humanly possible without exposing him to the potential of a second shooter. But instead, they allowed him to stand back up. They put a relatively small female agent in front of him, which doesn't protect him from his upper torso up to his top of his head. And none of that, again, made sense to me. So what are you guys all doing? It's like Keystone Cop stuff.
No, seriously. And we, you know, when America is strong, the world is strong. That was definitely a show of weakness on the world stage. And it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we have strong leaders who are going to call it like they see it, like I did on Monday, and ensure that this culture of failure in the Biden administration does not continue, which is why it's so important that we elect Donald Trump, but that we elect strong leaders, because very few people in Congress in either chamber are willing to call it out, are willing to ask the tough questions, and are willing to do more than write a strongly worded letter. If we want to fire someone, an officer that we can impeach, then we ought to force a vote on it, for example, which is what I did Monday night. I'm tired of seeing hearings and nothing coming from them. So if you are responsible for this horrific tragedy that happened, if Biden isn't going to fire you, we ought to force your resignation. That's what we did on Tuesday morning. But it's time more for action, less talking, more action. When these kinds of horrific things are happening, people have to be held accountable, and that's got to be on both sides of the aisle going forward.
Two quick questions away from this before I let you go. One about President Biden's final address to the American people. We assume it's his final address from the Oval Office. What was your response watching it last night?
Well, he was clearly confused, and he would not admit to why he was stepping down from his campaign. It didn't give any confidence in him being able to lead our country over the next 6 months. That was very telling that they're continuing the cover-up. No one is willing to admit why he's stepping down from the campaign. And if you don't have the strength or mental acuity to run a race for president, you certainly don't have the strength or mental acuity to run the United States of America. I believe that the 25th Amendment should be invoked here. But also there's no one more weak than Joe Biden than Kamala Harris. So we can't November just can't come here fast enough today, because I want to show American strength. And I will tell you the words of Bibi Netanyahu last night that Kamala and Joe Biden both skipped made me feel more proud to be an American than any other foreign dignitary who's been in there to date. It was deeply inspiring. That is the kind of strength America needs to have going forward to fight terrorism, to fight against the woke left, to fight against all these policies that are bringing our country down.
Finally, as a woman, a Republican woman, do you think that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance both have to be more careful about the language they're using now towards a female nominee on the other side? Now, I'm going to give you 3 examples. One, Donald Trump yesterday called Kamala Harris dumb as a rock, a lunatic and garbage. And J.D. Vance, from an earlier clip from an interview with Tucker Carlson several years ago, called her a childless cat lady, which is now being used, obviously, by Kamala Harris's side as a stick to beat the Republicans with as a bunch of misogynists. does the game have to change now in terms of rhetoric because there is a woman now likely to be the nominee?
I just watched Kamala Harris give a speech just moments ago where she called every single Republican an extremist and was spouting off lies and conspiracy theories about our party. I'm someone who likes to call it like I see it. I do believe that it is very important that we as Republicans talk about women's issues and that we have women on the stage. We have women speaking at Trump rallies. And in fact, it was Donald Trump who invited me onto the stage at the convention to talk about foreign policy, to talk about women's issues, and to tell my story as a single mom and as a suburban mom. And look, when Trump was president, he had so many women in his cabinet. He supports women. He supports IVF. He supports contraception and birth control. He supports women who are victims of rape and victims of incest. And those are the kinds of things that I want to see us talk about. And I've had really good conversations with Donald Trump about women's issues. I know that he cares. He's a father of girls, and he's a grandfather. And he's done a very good job so far talking about them. But we've got more to do. We've got between now and November to talk about the border, to talk about inflation, and to talk about how we support life and also how we support women in every single city across America.
Okay. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, thank you very much indeed for joining Uncensored.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go back to the panel for a quick reaction to that. Wajahat, your response to what happened to Donald Trump, putting aside whether you like him or not, we know where you sit with him personally, it does seem to have been a quite spectacular failure by the Secret Service to protect someone who'd been president of the United States.
I think we can all agree that we've never seen anything like that before, all of it. We need more information, specifically how come they didn't know about the shooter, how come after he was tagged about 90 seconds before the shooting by the crowd, how come he wasn't stopped, how come, you know, you and I have seen these episodes where Secret Service protect individuals, you know, how come they didn't just whisk him away? He got back up during an active shooting for that photo. That itself, honestly, when I was watching them, like, why? What are they doing? And then also, as of yesterday, I think the American people deserve to know more information about what happened. Christopher Wray of the FBI said, we don't know if a bullet hit him or if it was a shard. Is it a bullet? Is it a shard? What's the hospital records? I think Donald Trump should release the hospital records from that night. We don't trust Ronnie Jackson or Ronnie Johnson, whatever he calls him, his doctor, who's no longer a doctor. He said, oh, no, I treated him. Give us the hospital records. What's the treatment? What's the diagnosis? What's the injury? How's he healing? Give us more information and do more of an investigation as to how the Secret Service, especially that team at that time, bungled it up from before to the shooting to after the shooting. We deserve more information.
All right, Elizabeth, I mean, is it unreasonable for that information to be made public? I mean, it was interesting that the FBI Director, Wray, yesterday seemed to cast some doubt over whether Donald Trump's ear injury had been sustained by a bullet or by something else. Would the best way to clear that up just be to release the medical records?
I can't speak for Donald Trump, but I agree. I think in the interest of transparency, the American people deserve that when it comes to what happened to him, which we all saw, unfortunately, on our screens, which was terrifying, but also in regards to what happened with the Secret Service failure. The American people deserve better than that. My father-in-law was actually sitting behind Donald Trump, so I had one of the most terrifying 45 seconds of my life, not knowing if either one of them was alive. We know that an American's life was actually lost. I think that the Secret Service director resigning is the bare minimum, but it is what is owed, of course, to this family and to all of us. But I think a deeper investigation must be had. I think the American people deserve more. They deserve answers. Donald Trump deserves answers. The family who lost a father and a husband deserves answers. And I think we all need to know what happened. We need to ensure this never happens again. And we need to know what caused this failure to begin with. I think it's something that I would hope we all agreed on.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Knowles, there was a strange survey came out from YouGov, a poll, saying that 42% of Democrats blame Donald Trump and the Republicans for the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, which just seemed to me to be a completely absurd finding.
Of course they do, because Joe Biden and all of the Democrat leadership have established that premise. Joe Biden's entire campaign was predicated on Donald Trump posing an existential threat to democracy and Donald Trump following in the footsteps of Adolf Hitler, which he said in many ways, many times. And so if those two things are true, they're not true, obviously, like so many things that Biden says, but if those things were true, then that would justify the assassination of Donald Trump, unless you think that we ought to play soft with Hitler or with existential threats to our country. So I'm not surprised that some 40% of Americans would blame the man who was almost murdered. I also don't stay up at night wondering the answer to the questions of this mythical shard or any other ways that the Democrats are trying to downplay the very near, within a hair's breadth, assassination of Donald Trump. Only did not occur because at the last second he turned his head about 20 degrees. I know that it wasn't a shard from a teleprompter, for instance, because we have photographs from behind of the two teleprompters looking just fine after the bullet went through Trump's ear. As to why he wasn't immediately whisked off stage, I wonder why he wasn't held back in the holding room when they saw the shooter walking around a long while before the speech. But me, I'm a, just a regular Joe. When I go to a speaking event, they'll sometimes hold me back. I'm not the president of the United States, so that needs an answer. But then when he went down after having been shot, the reason they didn't pull him off is he went down, and he's a pretty big guy. We were hearing earlier that some of these agents couldn't even cover up to his chest. And then Trump himself said, hold on, let me get my shoe on. And he stood up there and he reassured the crowd, which demonstrated incredible political leadership, showed courage literally under fire. And then they got him off stage quickly after that. The answers that need to be given here are not how Donald Trump showed such immense courage and how this iconic photograph of political bravery was taken. The real questions are, why was Donald Trump not given sufficient security resources? Why did the Secret Service lie about the requests from the Trump campaign to get sufficient security resources? And how far up does this go? Sure, both parties now want to fire the Secret Service director, and she resigned, finally, under duress. But what about her boss, Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary? What about his boss, Joe Biden? How on earth is the most threatened man on planet Earth, Donald Trump, even needing to ask for additional security? And how on earth could it have been denied?
I completely agree. Got to leave it there. Thank you to my panel, Michael Knowles, Wajahat Ali, Elizabeth Pipko. I appreciate it very much indeed. That's it for us now. Many of you have noted that we are the content kings here at Uncensored. Over the next few weeks, there'll be slightly less content as the king, that's me, takes a bit of a summer break. But rest assured, we'll be there when it matters. We have huge plans for the run-up to the US election. So until next time, keep it uncensored.